Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. It's time, once again, for another depressing dose of dismal Disney. What happens when you produce a remake of a flop? You're probably going to have just another flop. The famous world-renowned physicist Albert Einstein is attributed to once having said, quote, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results," unquote. Well, in this particular case, I think whoever the person was at Disney who greenlit a remake of the 2003 flop, The Haunted Mansion, that starred Eddie Murphy, may meet the requirements of Einstein's definition because this weekend, Disney is releasing a new Haunted Mansion movie. And guess what? The opening weekend projections for the movie aren't looking too good. Let's see what Variety said in an article they published the other day. Disney's remake of Haunted Mansion opens on Friday in theaters, where it'll face an opponent that's much scarier than the threatening ghosts that populate the world of the supernatural comedy. That foe would be the collective force of Barbie and Oppenheimer, which have spent the past week putting box office projections to shame. Barbenheimer, as the inextricably linked movies have been nicknamed, will loom large over North American charts as Disney's new family film aims for third place. Haunted Mansion is projected to gross $25 million to $30 million from 3,700 North American theaters over the weekend. That's not a bad result for a kid-centric tentpole, especially in the wake of Barbie and Oppenheimer, except for its pesky price tag. Disney spent $150 million to produce the film and tens of millions on promotional efforts, leaving Haunted Mansion with a high threshold to reach profitability. Aw, that's just a shame, isn't it? So the original 2003 movie earned a measly $75.8 million domestically and $79.9 million internationally for a global grand total of $155.8 million. And given that the 2003 movie had a $90 million production budget at the time, multiplying that figure by 2.5 yields an estimated break-even point of $225 million to account for the 50% of gross ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget. So the original movie lost around $69.2 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when we divide by 2, means that Disney itself lost around $34.6 million on the 2003 Haunted Mansion movie. Since that original movie had opened on a Wednesday, its total domestic box office earnings following its $24.3 million opening weekend were around $34 million when combined with its opening weekend. So if I use the $24.3 million as the basis for normalizing the movie's domestic box office, I get an average weekly drop of 32.02%, as represented by the blue curve in the chart. Conversely, if I use the $34 million as the movie's opening weekend box office, then the average weekly drop rises to 44.91%, as represented by the red curve in the chart. The yellow line represents the actual domestic box office from week to week, with its varying weekly drops. Now, while the blue curve begins much lower, it tends to follow the actual box office more closely than the red curve. And I can confirm that with this next chart, which shows the differences between the blue and red curves and the actual box office. The overall average for the blue curve difference is around $558,000, while the overall average for the red curve difference is around negative $2.8 million. Additionally, the standard deviation for the blue curve differences is lower than the standard deviation for the red curve differences. So given that the overall average for the blue curve differences is much closer to zero than those of the red curve, as well as having a lower overall standard deviation, I concluded that using an average weekly drop of 32.02% is the more accurate of the two in representing how the 2003 Haunted Mansion movie performed at the box office, which means that this is the basis that I will use in projecting how well the 2023 remake may perform, along with the same domestic share as experienced by the 2003 movie. So if the 2023 Haunted Mansion only earns $30 million for its domestic opening weekend box office, with a possible average weekly drop of 32.02% and a possible domestic share of about 48.68%, the movie may only earn around $192.4 million in global gross box office revenue. Given that the movie's production budget is $150 million, by multiplying that by 2.5, we get an estimated break-even point of $375 million. Thus, Haunted Mansion is probably going to lose somewhere on the order of $281.4 million in global gross box office revenue, which, if we divide by 2, yields a possible loss for the Disney company of $140.7 million, which is certainly significant because that's an even greater loss than what their live-action race-swapped remake of The Little Mermaid is currently facing. And that movie has a much larger production budget, marketing budget, and break-even point than Haunted Mansion. Disney just can't get it right at the box office anymore. So far, I think that the only truly successful movie that Disney has had for 2023 is Marvel's MCU movie, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and that's about it. Everything else is pretty much flopping, with the possible exception of Disney Pixar's animated movie Elemental, which could potentially break even. There is simply no more magic in Disney, which they traded for an overdose of non-stop woke identity politics in every single movie that they are producing. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.